Do you have a tough challenge with your supply chain or logistics? Loguru is the intelligent partner that works globally with manufacturers, retailers, and logistics businesses. We help our customers define, buy, and safely implement solutions across the supply chain. If you want a more sustainable future for your supply chain, visit loguru.co.uk. Complete end-to-end satisfaction guaranteed.
Coming up in this episode.
The first thing that really got me onto this whole journey around sustainability was when I was working with a client. There was a big hoo-ha for this load that had not turned up. It was urgent. It had to go. It had to get there. It had to be turned around. It had to go back. And when it finally arrived, I called the client and said, we've got it. It's late and this is what we're going to do to put it right. And then I actually looked on the manifest and they were novelty plastic elephant poops. So it come all the way from China. And that's when I said, this is crazy.
The Logistics Collective podcast is a series focused on the logistics industry, where there are many incredible stories to be told. We'll be speaking with those who've worked and are working within the industry today. What have been their experiences, good and bad, since joining, and would they recommend a career in the industry to others? Here's your host, Malcolm Pope.
Hello and welcome to the next edition of Logistics Collective, the podcast. In this episode, we're dealing with energy transformation. Well, we're supposed to be living in a more sustainable world, and how we actually get there can be quite a challenge and maybe even quite an investment. So what I decided to do is to speak to two industry experts who are here with me today, and they're going to perhaps answer some of my questions and hopefully answer some of yours as well. So with me today, I have Stephen Fitter, who will introduce himself shortly, and also a wonderful French Canadian, but we've adopted him in the UK, called Benoit Laflamme as well. So what I'd like to say initially is welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Stephen, tell us about you then. What's your life been and what are you doing now?
Thanks, Malcolm. My background is in logistics and supply chain, and that is over both operational roles and also in project and program management. And it's led me to work across different sectors and industries. And I've always liked the logistics industry because of the problem-solving aspect of it. But I also love change as well. So project and program management is a really good match. And the reason why I mention this is because a few years ago, it occurred to me that I think within logistics, we are facing some massive challenges and transformations that are coming our way. And unless we do something about them, the sector is really going to struggle. And having done the job, I have empathy with operators and the challenge that they're facing. But on the upbeat side, I really think that decarbonisation is going to create a lot of opportunity, but with that change and challenge as well. And organisations can be often poorly equipped to deal with it. And that's hopefully what I can help people to do by providing them with the knowledge and the means to get there.
Well, it's good to hear you've got operational experience. Any names you care to share with us?
I worked for DHL for a long time across lots of different contracts.
Oh, the great red and yellow.
That's right.
There we go. So Benoit, bring some Québécois to us and bring that je ne sais quoi of your experience.
Of course. So I've been in the UK for 6 years now. Moved the family after a short stint in Paris. I always wanted to work abroad. And the train came to my station in 2016. So we left for initially a year and never really came back yet. We came back for vacation, but not resettled yet in Canada. So I come from the world of finance, not the sexy private investment or venture capital finance, more I call it the greasy part of finance, which is finance in trucks and construction equipment initially, forestry equipment as well, crushers, which I absolutely loved early in my career. And I eventually ended up in fleet management about 10 years ago because I got a bit tired of just doing finance of an asset. I wanted to touch the service element and the in-life maintenance of the asset. So I got in fleets, mostly commercial vehicles, my entire career, really. I haven't done a whole lot of car fleets, and that got me great career experiences. I managed some global accounts at one point and global relationships with partners. That's what took me to Europe. And in 2018, I had a chance to start managing a P&L inside a banking entity as well. So I was 4 years managing that company until it got sold. We were a little bit too small for the market. And that's been 2 years now, and I've been really itching to get into the transition phase, the transition space, because I can see all the change that operators are facing. Very early days and at the company I was running, I was trying to support customers through that questioning of what's next after diesel engines. And now for 2 years, I've been wanting to really be in the space, both feet into it. I've finally managed to find a couple of roles that are fractional that give me exposure. So first, I work for EV Energy, which is a transition tool and consulting practice to help customers transition. And secondly, I also work for a consulting firm that's in the district heating space. So interesting days, a lot of change, and I'm quite attracted by change. So I'm really looking to support people through that change and get on the other side still confident and with well-working businesses.
That's fantastic, and thank you. And I'm now in my 4th decade working within the industry, and I've got to be really honest with you. I've been waiting for this transformation for 2 decades at least. My view is that it is long overdue, and within those hills there are gold, but we just need to find our way of being able to actually access this really gold that is around sustainability. I think really to that point, I mean, we've recently completed a study with 5 or so major LSPs, and we asked the question really in terms of their position on sustainability and the maturity in terms of sustainability. And what they saw was the view forward in terms of energy transformation. And the keynote that I heard within this, I'm never going to reveal confidences, but there was a broad difference in terms of levels of maturity across businesses. The general trend is the larger you were, the more mature you tended to be. But there was complete, I won't call it confusion, but there was a diversity of views in terms of what might be powering our vehicles in the future. And really, what is that time scale going to be? So I wanted to come and ask 2 experts really here. And what do you see are the challenges that the industry are facing at the moment?
Just to add on your point before I answer your question, Malcolm, I do a lot of auditing, and I do that through ESOS, which is the Energy Savings Opportunity Scheme. And I do that from a transport aspect. So I'll go in over a period of a few days, look at an operation and see where they can really take some energy out. And so what that means is that I have a great view of where different people are on those different stages, very much from those that don't want to do anything to those that can see it as a great USP, for example, and they're basing their proposition on that. So I've had great experience over the last 18 months. I think 49 clients I did. So you see some very small businesses, some very large businesses, but some of the challenges are just the same. So the ones that I really want to mention, apart from the obvious ones, if you like, so for example, the eventual ban on things like diesel, with things like SECA as well, and other compliance matters.
So, Stephen, for the uninformed, what is SECA?
It's a streamlined energy carbon reporting. So it's another line of compliance that companies of a certain size have to do, and it's more or less aligned with ESOS, the Energy Savings Opportunity Scheme, and they're having to report and make public their carbon and energy emissions and consumption. So that really shines a spotlight on their own operations. And so when it comes to the challenges that soon become apparent, you've got companies that have to respond to these compliance regulations and requirements, but also as well we've got consumer bases that are becoming a lot more environmentally aware, and that will change buying habits. We've also got a change of things like powertrains, so things like electric, which are a lot more capex heavy than they are opex heavy, and that changes the ways and the operating models, the way that they've operated for years. And they can have an operating model that is built on the ready availability of diesel and petrol, and now we're trying to undo that in a very short amount of time. And by the way, everyone, you need to do this whilst maintaining service levels and also with very tight margins as well. And you can just see how it can be extremely daunting and overwhelming for some of these organizations to approach.
And to add to this, what I see as well is, given the scale it has, it's possible that people just want to wait it out and see if it gets a bit more clear later down the road. So you've got on one side the government pressing hard with hard deadlines, the governance of companies asking for transparency on emissions, really everything pushing the transition. But at the same time, you've got something so new, so disruptive that it's daunting to think, okay, can we do all this and keep the lights on? There's also a need for thinking completely differently from where it used to happen, where you had departments responsible for this and another department responsible for that. And we used to deal with fleet, and fleet was master of its own destiny and offering an available truck for whatever operations used to need it. And that can't be true anymore. You just can't go through your fleet replacement cycle and run it every year and just keep the beat drum going. It doesn't work. You need to start planning much further ahead. A year out was hard to get from fleet managers or transport managers in the past. We'd struggle all the time to get orders put in time to slot within manufacturer ordering slots. Now, if you don't look 2 years out, you're probably going to be waiting in queue, waiting for energy to be available for your vehicles. So it's a whole change of mindset. And the reality is, we heard it last week I was at the Motor Transport Decarbonisation Summit, and there was a transport manager there, and he said, look, we sometimes we don't know, and we can be weeks and months just trying to figure out how things work or how these things work, and that there's a lack of knowledge, and it's hard to admit that. It's hard to be vulnerable in organizations, even in large ones. I guess more so in large ones where there tends to be some politics. You don't want to be the one that says, I actually don't know how to deal with this. So, the human aspect is huge. There's pollution and emissions and governmental guidelines. But on the other side of this, there's people sometimes who are completely frightened because they can see that big beast coming at them, the wall coming at them very fast, and they don't know how to handle these things. And that's quite a lot. So no wonder why people need to get some support through this.
I find it interesting. I mean, the point in terms of being scared, I mean, what I will say throughout my career, that the one learning lesson that I've had is that all emperors are naked. And what I'm trying to say there is that even at the most senior levels, people are struggling with answers, trying to find answers for really difficult questions. I do pose within this to try and drive the thinking with this as to whether or not methodology in terms of risk assessments should be brought into this. So what is the future going to bring? And there's going to be a cost and a capability element within this that drives our path to more sustainable solutions coming forward. And so it's looking at what you do today and saying, how much of what I do today can I do cost effectively based on a sustainable solution as it stands today? And how much is it within the capability, both in terms of lead times, transit times, reloadability, all of those things? It's getting down to the crux of understanding this is the extent of change. And I always believe in understanding where the risks are. And I think that's absolutely key. that might sound overwhelming, but I think it's better to be overwhelmed with a plan rather than overwhelmed and just waiting for something to happen. So my next question really is, for some of those companies that are overwhelmed by some of the steep changes required by electrification, what are some of the ways that they can make an impact without spending large amounts in CapEx?
And it's a great question, because quite often I hear, we can't go to electric yet, we can't do this yet, we can't do that investment yet. And quite often I turn around and say, well, actually, what about some of the low-hanging fruit? I know it's a bit of a saying, but it does perfectly describe it. What are you doing with driver training? What are you doing with things like fuel additives? What are you doing with route optimization and vehicle fill and some of the other things that you just mentioned there, Malcolm? Because actually, some of these things, good fleet managers have just been doing for decades, but they just probably haven't been doing it in the name of sustainability. And so obviously, to be more efficient, you are going to reduce your emissions. You're going to make better use of your energy, and lots of that kind of stuff you can get on with today. And really, you should be getting on with it today as just a part of continuous improvement and best practice. But quite often, when I talk to a company, that's the first bit that I go to. What are you doing with what you've got today? But then also, to your point, about purpose, really, I ask that question quite often, which is, why have you got vehicles? And sometimes people look at me like I've gone nuts, which is because I've got to move that stuff over there. To which back I go, well, let's push the reason. Let's question the as is. Why have you got that vehicle, and what should it look like? Do you even need that vehicle? What stuff is it moving around? Because you need to take it back to basics sometime to make sure that you've got the right solution for the right user case.
Thanks, Stephen.
On my side, what I think is important is really to try to get your head out of the forest and look at the top of the trees a little bit, and really craft a plan where you break the problems in manageable bits, like we tend to do whenever there's something big hitting us. You need to find people who will have time and scope to think strategically and engage with resource. Take the time. The last thing you want is to have people come back from a one-day conference and be completely sucked in by their day-to-day and not even able to digest what they just learned. So it's all about freeing up people that will really guide that long-term transition, addressing the bits you can do now. Stephen, I totally agree with you. It's sometimes we think of, well, this is so big, this is so enormous. Actually, just start doing some bits now that you can do that are manageable. And actually, when you get in the doing, you actually realize that there's a slight change of culture. People all of a sudden start to follow along, and then you're no longer a lone warrior in that initiative trying to do it all by yourself. You're actually supported by people around you that actually are carrying some of the load with you. So create that virtuous cycle of change. And it doesn't have to be ripping up your parking lot right away and putting a bunch of chargers right away. It can be as easy as everybody tuned in to the same song and looking at ways we can optimize the way we burn stuff today, so that we get in the mindset of transitioning or of decarbonizing that way first, and finding the time to really do the right level of planning and engagement with the different areas of the business that actually now need to be involved. If you're always running like a headless chicken, there's no way you're going to tackle something as big.
I so wanted you to say poulet sans tête there, but
I would have said it differently.
Good.
But I heard what you said.
Tell me how to say it properly then.
Comme une poule sans tête.
Poule sans tête. Okay. Nearly. I'm having French lessons while we're on here, which I think is amazing. I sort of look at this. I mean, the first thing that I would state, whilst we have a stated journey to net zero, any reduction on that journey is good. It's positive. And here's the thing that I see. I don't see people selling the space that they have. And what do I mean by that? I don't see large-scale organizations really looking quite closely at the big picture and the big data picture and say, how could we organize this better, even within ourselves? So could we actually collaborate within ourselves, first view? And then secondly, could we collaborate with other people to actually fill that gap? Because whether or not there's an argument that says, well, what's empty running? Some people say it's 11%, governments generally say it's 25%. And I think the difference between those two are all about subcontracting. So a company will look at it and say, I've subcontracted it, the return load is not my responsibility. And in essence, financially, no, it's not. But from a sustainability argument, I would say, yes, it is. But there'll be others that will have written the laws in terms of, or the regulations in terms of how you write this, that may well have a point of disagreement. But for me, that sort of starting point is, if you're going to go on a journey towards net zero, be sure that you're giving our vehicle manufacturers and people that are investing in energy and new forms of energy time to generate the real working solutions, the real cost-effective working solutions for the future. So there'll be part of your business that today you could use an electrified vehicle for, but there are going to be other parts of your business, hence my question about risk assessment in terms of cost and capability, that aren't currently in play. So what you should do for the stuff that's not currently in play is use different processes in order to be able to say, how can we actually save carbon in terms of this? And trust me, I've had experience within one business of getting two parts of that business to talk to one another, and millions of miles were saved. And they hadn't thought about it until I spoke to them about it. So it's interesting. So according to you, and to you both, what's the most important thing to consider when going through periods of change?
Well, change in general, the big thing for me is around people and empathy. We've spoken a lot about people maybe feeling overwhelmed at the moment, new territory for them, out of their comfort zone, and you've got to have empathy for people, and because empathy for the people within a business is empathy for the business overall, isn't it? And so you've got to go in with that mindset that will touch all of those people and the functions and the roles that they have, and start to really understand what the impact is going to be of this change. And what I'd recommend thoroughly to anybody undertaking a change of such size is to take a step back first. Because I've also seen where the companies have, albeit they want to do the right thing, they've just jumped in and maybe just gone and got an electric van, and then they've just retrofitted it into a diesel operating model, and their conclusions are electric is rubbish, when in fact what they haven't done is got the right new processes for it. They haven't thought about how it's going to be used differently, whether that be through driver or supporting infrastructure and all of these things. So they're not really giving the task the best chance that it can to give the best results. And also following on from Benoit's point earlier on about someone going back from a summit with a head full of ideas, and then the next day they're faced with a calendar full of meetings, and they probably just don't have the bandwidth. They've got the day job to do, and as I remember a lot of my transport operator days, there's a lot of time spent firefighting. And a motorway closes, or an emergency order comes through, or many of these things as well. So to have a mature thought about how change is not going to just affect the business, but how you're going to manage that, and your people you're expecting to carry out and initiate that change is very important.
I think empathy is always very, very important, and giving people space to think. And I think the danger without help is that a lot of organizations do not create that space to think, to innovate. And your point earlier in terms of, well, I need to do something for sustainability, let's buy an electric truck, without actually thinking everything through. Greenwashing anybody? It really does deserve to have some deeper thinking around this, really around this. And even when I'm looking at it at maybe at very senior posts within large-scale organizations, when there is There's a confusion. I'm not saying these organisations are unprofessional, far from it, but there is a confusion on what path we need to follow. And I think what we need to develop is an evolutionary model that helps businesses go through there. And sorry, Benoit, I've dashed in again, so I shall be quiet. Go on, Benoit. What do you think?
I was so clear on what I was going to say, but no, it's still clear. To me, it's all about working with the team. The first question is how are people being managed, and how frequently can they voice some of their concerns honestly, transparently about what they don't know. If it's unknown, then it's very, very hard to support them through a period of change. So having that space and time to have a proper one-to-one where the manager really understands the gaps, understands how that person needs to be supported. And oftentimes, and I've seen it in many organizations, your team leaders, your middle managers are just really good, competent doers that ended up in charge of a bunch of people, and they're not equipped to manage properly. They don't know how to do a proper one-to-one. It's just mechanical. And we could talk about handling supplier relationships as well, or partner relationships, which is I know a subject you quite dear to you, Malcolm, is having that time to go deep with your employees, between that employee-manager relationship, with your partners, getting them beyond the usual routine check on KPIs, and actually talk about what do they see going through, what do they see happening, what do and having the opportunity as a client also to share what's your strategic plan, where you're taking the business, and what decisions you're taking, so that they don't end up being caught off guard. So it's all about your example earlier about filling trucks. It's all a question of collaboration, and you can't make good collaboration happen if everybody's playing with their cards close to their chest. That's true in an employee relationship. That's true in a supplier relationship. So I'm a huge fan of transparency. I've had some hard lessons of too much transparency in the past, but I think it helps create really strong partnerships.
I thoroughly agree. I think most organizations, they're busy doing the day job. They're busy doing what they need to do to turn a coin, to make a profit, to keep people employed, to keep customers happy, to keep suppliers moving. They're doing all of this day-to-day stuff. So thinking about that, that might be one obstacle, but do you have in mind any other obstacles that prevent organizations from successfully transforming themselves beyond the day-to-day?
Yeah, I think the appreciation or lack of appreciation of the size of the change that is going to be coming their way is a big thing. We've spoken already in the last half hour or so about mindset changes and how that can be difficult. And it is too easy, I think, at the moment to not do so much on it. You can kind of get away with it at the moment. And I wonder what you both think when I say that in the future, do you think we'll look back at 2024 and go, we actually had it quite easy then. We didn't have as much pressure. We did have some compliance things coming along that asking us about carbon and such like, but it wasn't to the extent it was today.
I just wonder whether or not there is somebody out there that is thinking differently now and really embracing the future. And whether they will turn around and say, well, absolutely wonderful. I'm so far ahead of the game. I got all my homework in on time, which is really annoying, but I was absolutely ahead of the game and I got it right. Or whether or not you might have some larger scale businesses that are looking and saying, well, it's not in this year's results. It's not going to impact me whether or not I win this business or not. And 2035 sounds a long time away. And I'd probably be, I'll give you one quote unquote, well, I'm going to be retired then. I could be expired then, let alone retired, and I still care about this. And you have to leave behind some legacy of thinking and learning. And My response to you is that sitting in the future and looking back at 2024, I think it'll be regret. And that's what I'm looking at this point in time. Understanding all of the other pressures that are in place, I still think it'll be one of regret.
I think you're absolutely right. And I've seen some bizarre actions and I've heard some bizarre things as well, very much in the vein of what you've just said, which is if I'll be long retired, or I've heard even worse than that, before my business has an electric vehicle. I've heard that kind of mindset, and I can't help but feel sorry for the company that they are going to be leaving behind, because they're going to put them on the wrong footing. But there is that, if we go back to that sort of 2035, it does seem like a long way. And in our own lives, if you think how old you're going to be, and my kids are going to be, 11 years older, and that feels like a long time away. But when you start talking about large fleets and operations and where you need to get to and how that change needs to happen and the scale of it feels like tomorrow for lots of operations. It doesn't feel that far ahead at all.
I believe this changes everything. If you try and do it now, it changes everything. Your only real solution in terms of it not changing everything is that somebody invents, for the same price as an existing LGV, HGV that runs on diesel, that does it at the same price as an electric vehicle, with the same range, with the same capacity, with the same recharging ability. And you get all of that done, and you don't really have to change much. And that, I just wonder whether or not people, industry is capable of great innovation. Do you think that people are holding back and saying, well, it's not really quite there, and things are really very expensive, and they're not particularly functional at this point in time, and let's just hope and wait and see? Do you think there's some of that going on?
I think there's a lot of that going on, but some of that is dressed up as procrastination. I hear quite often, and I don't want to get into rabbit hole of hydrogen, but I hear quite often we're waiting for hydrogen. And I say, well, okay, that's fine, but what are you doing today? So it goes back to those points that we were saying earlier on. What can you do today through driver training or fuel additives, aerodynamics, tyre choice, and all of that type of stuff, that all marginal gains, but sum up to some really big wins? And the answer is usually nothing. And you think, well, I think the best thing going into a change program like this is, don't think you're going to have all the answers straight away. You're not going to sit down in a traditional project Prince 2 methodology and say, well, let's list out all the things that we're going to do between now and 2035 or 2040 or whenever your net zero target is, and have all the answers. But what you do need to do is have that plan. And I say to people, it's okay to have, yes, I know what I'm going to do with, I'll just say driver training again, because I can do something in that today, and that's in my short term. What's in my midterm? Well, my midterm might be aerodynamics, so I'm going to have to invest a bit more in that, but there's something there. But then in the long term, where I've got a particularly tricky geographical area, which I know isn't very well served by electric infrastructure or has other operational demands, which means you can't make the change at the moment, that's okay. Let's get on with the stuff we can get on with, and maybe put a placeholder in for, right, in 6 months' time or a year's time. Let's look at that long-term plan again. What has changed? What can we go back and visit? But certainly don't just go, well, I've got that one user case in the Highlands of Scotland or wherever it should be, which means I'm okay to do nothing for now.
Thanks, Stephen. And Benoit, thinking about obstacles?
What I was clearly thinking about is, I didn't mention that in my bio earlier, but the deep motivation in me to come and support that industry and feed the fire of change is, I'm frustrated as a kid who I still see myself as young. I still got 20 or 30 years left to work, but I've got 20 years of experience now, so I'm kind of sitting mid-career, and I'm frustrated to look at how long we waited to reduce carbon emissions. I look at all those heat charts and I'm so frustrated. I mean, I see it as the same as saving for your retirement, which probably we won't get the chance to enjoy in our generation. I think we're probably going to die at work because we'll never be rich enough people to really retire and get the state to pay for us. But that's for another podcast. But I see it as savings. If you start started, the first job you had, if you started saving a little bit, the mountain is not unsurmountable when you get in your 50s and 60s. If you put it out to the end, like we have done as businesses for years and years and years, well, the more you wait, the change needs to be, and the more drastic the costs are going to be. So I see this as, let's make something right away. Why have we not done anything earlier? But now is the time to change. One of the obstacles I see is lack of collaboration. You can see it. I cannot believe how many different smaller voices we have for this industry. We should have one voice when we address the government. Why have we got that many different organizations?
To be fair, the multiples of organizations that are out there representing the industry, they are making moves to actually, I mean, I've had the great pleasure of interviewing Phil Rode from Logistics UK and Claire Bottle from UCWA and Richard Smith from the RHA. And I think they're doing their best to begin to take a more coordinated approach between them and the other professional bodies within the industry to try and speak to this. So I think that's already acknowledged. I think we need to, for me, it is entrenched thinking is about sitting there and saying, well, the enemy will go away. And the enemy here being the one of climate change. And that entrenched thinking is not going to work. And it's not going to allow you to go and seek the horizons and say, well, okay, what new solutions are out there? I think what you've got to come up with is a program for change. And I think you've got to do that baseline risk assessment and look at the capability of the solutions around you and where'd you go with it. And I mean, do you think we are entering this era of collaboration across industry players? And what do you see as some of the benefits of working collaboratively? Because I need to shut the hell up here, because I've been focused in the area of collaboration for 20 odd years. And if you want to talk about a build-up of frustration, try it for 25 years of being frustrated about why we're not moving in what I would say is a more balanced and more considered direction, and why have we missed all of the opportunities that we could have had all those years ago by actually just thinking a little bit differently. We could have given ourselves a head start.
Yeah, so it's great to see there's a waking up to the need to be collaborating. And again, it's better to be starting in the right direction rather than all of a sudden thinking magically that everything's going to happen all at once. Another way of collaborating is also to look at what's happening elsewhere. The US government has put tremendous amount of money in transition funds, and there's probably some examples to look at in the Nordics. There's been a bit more change happening in the bus sector. There's been evidence of a transition there as well. So how can we use some of those lessons learned and bring them across? Avoid thinking in an echo chamber and really open up your blinders and look at what's happening elsewhere, because there are cases you can learn from and bring in to speed up the change.
So let me stop being so activist, or as pain in the ass, as some people would say of me. If we're looking in terms of business, I mean, what effect does the energy transition have on business strategy, do you feel?
I think it has everything to do with business strategy. It's a shift not just for the logistics industry, but for business as a whole, the economy as a whole, society as a whole. And therefore, businesses need to be thinking in the future how they're going to act. And the different opportunities that come from that. So yes, you could have a strategic and tactical plan to address the ban on internal combustion engines, of course, and that's a very important thing. But then you also need to think about opportunities like energy reselling, for example. If you've got the facilities to do it and you can do it, and that's another revenue stream you can potentially have. And then that goes to collaboration. Then you work with another company that says, you deliver to us, 2 times a day. Do you want some charging? And then you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours type thing. And there's that collaboration that with those business opportunities. But I mean, I've probably gone down a rabbit hole into a specific one there. But the point is it's about thinking outside of the box, the cliche, but it's true, to say, well, actually, what else? If our operating model is going to look very different in the future, how can we make it work at the best for us with the new assets we're going to have, the new ways of working we're going to have, and also as well from a fleet specific point of view, being a lot more strategic around vehicles, and not only just the modes that they use, the size of them, and how they fill them as well. Because I think we're probably guilty as an industry of how many boxes have you got me to shift? Okay, it turns out to be that many loads, I'll get you that many vehicles, when in fact we've all seen shocking wastes of packaging, for example, that could be vastly reduced. And I'm sure if there's a few marketing people listening to me on this podcast might be thinking, yeah, but it's not that simple. I probably think it isn't that simple. But
is this you're starting a campaign to ban Easter eggs?
well, quite. And yeah, I don't know if this is appropriate or not, but the first thing that really got me onto this whole journey around sustainability was when I was working with a client years ago, and there was a big hoo-ha for this load that had not turned up, and it was urgent. It had to go. It had to get there. It had to be turned around. It had to go back. And when it finally arrived, I called the client and said, "We've got it. It's late, and this is what we're going to do to put it right." And then I actually looked on the manifest, and they were plastic elephant poos, novelty plastic elephant poops that come all the way from China. And that's when I said, this is crazy. So that's the kind of thing that we need to go working collaboratively. It's very easy to assume working collaboratively is with another LSP just down the road or whoever, but it's also about working internally as well. So what are the products that we are selling, how we are packaging, what is the impact on the transport, the lead times we're offering to our customers as well. I'm not a fan of same day delivery, next day deliveries. It can put so much strains on supply chains. And there's that sort of education to customers as well, that if we can get out there, and I know it's a lot easier said than done, Malcolm, but if we can get that message out there to people that this is the effect that it has, that your item has to be has to be on your doorstep the next day. Does it? That's the kind of things that we need to get to that has big effects on logistics.
This is the debate between need and want. And I remember talking to shall we say, one of the major parcel consolidators, without revealing any names. And the keynote there is that, their thinking was, well, maybe we need to have a sustainability button. So that when we're ordering something, need versus want. So if I've got a disease and I need to have a drug to actually make me well, and I really need that right now, then that's a true right now. But in the search for plastic elephant poo, with the best will in the world, please don't deliver it to me. But the other side of it is that why are we getting excited about stuff that's delivered right damn now? And please don't get me started on really the view is, well, I can have it because I can't be bothered shuffling down in my slippers to my local convenience store. I can go and have my products delivered at a higher cost and what that is doing. And then don't get me started on when we're actually looking at what is the differential. So I've been searching, and maybe you too can help me with this. What is it better to go for if I'm looking at my weekly groceries? Is it better if I drive to my local store? Now, I know that by itself brings a whole series of questions. So I'm driving, first off. What am I driving? Is it a horrible old chuggy diesel, or am I doing it in an electric car that has been charged by the solar panels on top of my roof? Which has it been? Or is it better for me to wait inside and allow somebody else to come and deliver it for me?
I'm not sure. Personally, I still have the internal debate. Being in London, and actually we can go down the street on foot, and I've got two major brands, two major grocery chains right on my doorstep. So I still have the debate, or do I go that, or do I do a bigger order on a weekly basis and plan it ahead? In my case, I'm not sure what's best. But there was a case where we were up at the top of Scotland on vacation, and it was a half an hour drive to get to Thurso and a half an hour drive to get back. And in my mind, having the grocery store load a 3.5-ton truck full of groceries and deliver the whole town made the most sense. So it's not always black or white. Sometimes it's gray. But in this case, I'm absolutely confident if you can force people with pricing as well to fill up that truck and encourage them to put their groceries on board of that truck, and you avoid that journey 20 minutes, half an hour in an area where everybody drives petrol and diesel cars, I'm absolutely confident you've got a better outcome for the planet there.
But what I would say, and very respectfully say, that is based on a feeling rather than what I would say is an audit that's gone through and say what is best. I've sat down with a piece of paper and worked it out, and for me, overall, traditional shopping was better. And it's on the basis of, it is that argument, it depends. So where is your home delivery coming from? What is the distances between the stop? What is the likely load fill across all of that? But there isn't really any information that is supporting that I can see that says, well, okay, if I want to make that decision, how do I do it? So this is, rather than legislated sustainability, this is there is a proportion of society that are very interested in this and they don't necessarily have a sustainable option. I had one client asking me to say, well, could you please make sure that all of my distribution in the UK is net zero? And I had to give them the really honest answer of, well, without actually buying a load of horses and carts, no. In terms of the pattern of distribution that you have and the scale of distribution that you have, the answer is no. So I think it's interesting. But I do think that the industry is only scratching the surface of it at the moment.
One thing is sure is that the more information will be available for the person clicking the button or putting the order to make that informed decision, the better it's going to be in terms of outcomes. Because I so wish that if I knew the blueberries I ordered online were from Africa, I would have not ordered them. But yeah, that's another debate. But back, I just wanted to add one more point on business strategy. We talked about online ordering right there. That's one thing I think as an industry we need to start including in our business strategy sessions is where could our competition come from in the near future. That's one point. The other point that I think is quite important as well is we tend to take decarbonization decisions based on assuming a relatively stable current reality with combustion engines. But if you're looking at the 5, 7, 8 year cycle, and you start looking at how quickly things can change, one thing very few people, in my understanding, include is the potential new costs that will come for not doing anything or for not going fast enough in the transition. So in the near future, I could imagine governments starting to use a bit more of a stick approach or customers really forcing harder. So the cost of waiting, I think, is something that needs to become part of strategy, or the cost of not doing, because it's inevitably going to be hitting your business at some point in the near future.
I certainly don't disagree with what you've said. My point of worry, but perhaps not for today, but for another day, is this will drive inflation in the areas that probably some of the less well-to-do folks that we have in society, is that they are going to bear an unequal cost in terms of this. That's my fear in terms of if we do it in the wrong way, the most vulnerable in society will actually be hit harder in terms of this. But I'll move on and really thinking about what we mentioned earlier. What are some of the here and now actions a business could take to start moving in the right direction, do you think?
Well, we've covered quite a few earlier. I think we haven't really spoke about route optimization and planning, really. That's something that I speak with companies very often on, and then that's something that's becoming a lot more sophisticated with software applications and developments that that are now on the market, from use of artificial intelligence to things like digital twins as well, which I think I look at solutions such as digital twins as having an extra pair of hands in the transport office, really, to really get under the skin of what the fleet is doing. But obviously, those kind of things do have a investment that's required into them and some time to get up and running within your business. But good old-fashioned, decent planning of your routes and optimization is something that you can do relatively easy. And again, you should be doing. Lots of companies that I work with have a base bus stop mentality routing, which can be fine for lots of places, but for others, it's not. It's just the easier way of doing it, which is a poor way of looking at it, I think, because an investment in decent planning and some planning software will yield great results. And I do find it quite surprising how many companies don't have some of these basics in place. I got asked a question not so long ago. Someone said to me, "Is telematics mandatory?" And I said, "No, it's not mandatory at all." She goes, "But everyone's got it, right?" I said, "No, they haven't." And it's hard to, I haven't done the percentage, Malcolm, but I would say off the top of my head, it's about 20% of all those companies I looked at during the ESOS, which was 49 different clients. Yeah, about 20% of them didn't have any sort of data insight. And others had telematics. And this is another good point as well. I really want to, but I like to think it is a good point anyway, which is it's all well and good having telematics, but you need to do something with that data. And this is the number one recommendation I have to everybody, is to measure, is to manage. Another cliche, but it's absolutely true. So have a look at what your fleet is doing. Look at where they're going, what that journey is being done for, and how efficient that vehicle is being used. So many companies not only don't have view of the data, but those that do have view of the data don't actually do anything with it.
I wonder how many conversations I had with a logistics company going to its customers and saying, if we could change your delivery slot or your delivery day, and if we could change your delivery frequency, we could save this much CO2. I wonder how often that happens.
Not very often, I think.
And I wonder then, from a customer perspective, what would their views be about that? I'm seeing very large-scale businesses struggling with Scope 3. And this, to me, is that there needs to be a mindset change. But, Benoit, have you got any more to say on this question?
Well, just to finish, continue on the thought you had there, how can you bring what could be maybe a crazy idea in front of a customer? Well, if you don't have that partnership mindset, you probably don't stand the chance to bring up the conversation. But if you are both looking on both sides of the fence at doing something positive for the planet, then and you're in a true partnership, then that could be possible to bring it to the floor and discuss it. The other thing I would add would be if I came from many years in the financial services, so governance is everywhere in financial services. And I find having great governance, it really helps keep you in a virtuous cycle. So there are habits that keep forcing you to pull out that plan and revisit it. So the first instance of governance for big companies is going to be their board, and a lot of managers hate the board event. Actually, that board is something that forces you to prepare and review your plans and review what you talked about last time, and get on the front foot to be ready for that board session. So if you can see it as a positive event that keeps you on track with proposing fresh ideas and driving forward change, that's good. But what else can you put on side of the board? If it's an annual event, it's not enough. You need to find ways of having virtuous cycles that keep you on track, that keep you thinking strategically. Because if you only do that once a year, and that's only for large organizations, a lot of small organizations don't even have a real board. It's just a paper exercise. Well, if you are in the smaller size business of the industry, why don't don't you have a board? Why don't you force yourself at least once a year to think through strategically and be challenged on your plans? And what more can you do to keep being outside of the day-to-day and into the long term?
Or indeed, if that's uncomfortable, find some help out there to help you think strategically. We've covered a lot, and we've probably overrun a little bit. And I'm going to make a proposal here now for an episode 2. I think in the episode 2, I think we need to go and explore data. I think we need to explore what are the unresolved problems. And there are quite a few unresolved problems. And I also think certainty of legislation is going to be an interesting one. You mentioned the US and their investment in terms of sustainability. Well, we have an election, and perhaps the focus is maybe going to change. And the way I rationalise it is that in the first stages of sustainability and really achieving it, this is about profitability. And so if you can't speak to one arena, speak to actually becoming more efficient and therefore more profitable, and therefore, as a little bit of a subtext, you are sustainable as well. I think it's interesting. I think the recent statement by our Prime Minister from COP29 was interesting. And I always think it's fascinating that I wonder, and here's my sort of parting thought before I give you a chance to come in, how connected are the commitments made at this sort of level to what the reality is on the ground? And how connected is a target to viable solutions to achieve it? So I'm just wondering in terms of what the thinking process is. It needs to happen, I get that, but pragmatism rules okay in my view.
Yeah, it's a great question of how connected they are. I find quite often with companies one or two things. Number one being, we've committed to net zero by 2030. How am I going to get there? Which I find absolutely bonkers if they're not doing any due diligence or looking into it. I've seen great reveals, public reveals. We're going to be net zero by 2030. How am I going to take that out of my vehicles? Well, that's the other thing. But I think with the targets that we have in place, I think from net zero, I think he said 81% by 2035. Is that correct?
88, I thought it was.
88 was it? Yeah, 88%. There are a lot of unanswered questions for me about how we do that with the fleets that we have running around this country. I think without some real support, both financially, regulatory, and advice and guidance, really, it seems like a long shot.
I would say it's quite evident that things have not been completely reversed engineered to completely match up to deliverable outcomes and actions on the ground. That's quite evident. But I think we are where we are because we have waited for quite some time. And we're now at the stage of saying that's where we need to get to. And let's drive some urgency to make it. And we better shoot for the stars and land on top of the trees than just say we can't do it, and we sit on our hands for another 20 years. It would have been less painful if we would have started the transitions 10 years ago, but we are where we are. So we need to shoot high and do absolutely everything we can by starting with the bits we can do now and actually plan for going as bold as possible in the future when technology stabilizes and new opportunities come forward. And we could end up being surprised. We have been surprised in certain sectors of the economy, like how quickly we could take up wind and how quickly solar has become cheaper. So let's continue to be bold and let's continue to shoot with ambition targets and deadlines, because we've tried the no regulation route and it hasn't really given us huge results, hasn't it?
I guess in terms of shooting for the stars is interesting. I would rather go to JF Kennedy more than anything else. And I guess within the, choosing to be on the moon and shooting for the moon, if you're going to do that, you're going to have to get there. And I think this is an imperative in itself. Politics is a game, and anybody that leads has to set some notional direction. And I'm not so unkind as to say they need to have everything solved. But we can have an ambition. But what I see at the moment is that more work desperately needs to be done to actually put the wheels under the strategy in order to be able to get to net zero. I think people need to stop being afraid of it, and they need to get a grip with it and understand and begin to understand what is the situation now, what is the art of the pragmatic and practical today, and what then are the key developments and key changes that could be made. I mean, one whole area we've not discussed is intermodality and carbon benefit through intermodality. And it's a long-term frustration of me of being based on an island when we do very, very little intra-island on the island of Great Britain moves in terms of using sea freight. You would look at it in terms of probably more carbon neutral to actually build ferry terminals than it is to build long high-speed railway lines. And it's certainly more sustainable to move product by ship than it is by truck or indeed by rail. So how do you actually put this together? And the view there we come back to, I think, where we will start next time, which is data, which is if we're not using data to actually tell us where we can be, and tell us what the possibilities are, and actually get us innovating, where the hell are we going to be? I think what yourselves are doing within this in terms of driving thinking and working with the industry on this is noble and damned amazing. And I'd encourage anybody that is facing a problem like this to please come engage with Stephen and Benoit and help you get a proper plan together, and maybe have a plan that will surprise you in terms of it could actually deliver you bottom line benefits in the early stages of this. So I think that's important. So Stephen Benoit, for this episode, because I wrote you into a second episode because I talk too much. Thank you ever so much for being in this podcast. I hope you found it interesting. I certainly have.
Found it very interesting and very enjoyable. Thank you, Malcolm.
Same here, and looking forward to episode 2.
Thank you, gentlemen, so much. So if you have liked what you've heard today, please feel free to visit us on logisticscollective.com, and you can interact. You can send us voice messages and text messages around any of the podcasts we put up on there. And please think about liking and following us on all of the major podcast platforms, for example, Spotify, so that you can get an alert when the next podcast is due out. And I'm making 2025 for the podcast channel an area that is thinking about sustainability in the broadest sense. And that, for me, I think is going to be my thread and my little help to gift some thinking in what I believe is the right direction in terms of sustainability going forward. So, hope you enjoyed it. All the very best to you. Goodbye.
You can get in contact by email, podcast@logisticscollective.com, or leave a voice message on our website, logisticscollective.com. The podcast is a production by Le Guru.